Zephyra stood motionless as the cold, metallic echo of Vorthan's proclamation reverberated through the grand hall. The alien king's voice, once a source of comfort, now wielded the sharp edge of rejection. The crowd of towering, elegant beings watched silently, their glowing eyes reflecting disapproval. Zephyra's diminutive 4-foot frame was a glaring contrast to their majestic stature, her delicate wings drooping under the weight of humiliation. "You are unworthy," Vorthan declared, his expression carved in indifference. "You cannot bear the future of our kind. Your exile is the only course." Her heart ached, not just from his words but from the knowledge that this exile was inevitable. In a society obsessed with perfection and legacy, her inability to bear children rendered her obsolete. She had clung to the hope that Vorthan, the one who had once shown her kindness, might defend her. But even he, bound by duty, had turned away. A guard roughly pushed her forward, signaling it was time to leave. Her luminous blue skin flushed a faint silver, a sign of suppressed emotions her kind rarely displayed. As the imposing gates of the palace opened, revealing a desolate expanse of stars beyond, Zephyra swallowed her pride. She wouldn't let them see her break. Inside the survival pod, silence enveloped her. The stark interior held no comforts, only the basics needed for her survival. She gazed out the window as her home planet shrank into a pinprick of light. The realization that she was utterly alone, cast aside like debris, tightened her chest. Yet she refused to cry. Her race had always prided itself on cold logic and efficiency. Emotions were weaknesses, empathy a flaw. It was why they ruled so many systems. They believed themselves superior. And yet, as she drifted further from them, she couldn't shake the thought. What good was perfection if it left no room for compassion? The pod's navigation system beeped, pulling her from her thoughts. The coordinates were set to a barren outpost on the outskirts of Earth's solar system, a forgotten corner of the galaxy. Zephyra barely knew of humanity, save for the dismissive whispers of her kind. Primitive, chaotic, barely worth notice. As the pod's engines hummed softly, Zephyra closed her eyes, letting her mind wander. Memories of the king's voice, the way he had once spoken to her with warmth, surfaced unbidden. She had believed, perhaps foolishly, that she was more than just a defect in his eyes. But no, she was nothing. For hours, she sat in silence, the emptiness around her mirroring the void inside. The pod shuddered as it entered the orbit of the desolate moon where she would spend the rest of her days. She stared at the bleak landscape, her resolve hardening. Her people had abandoned her, but she wouldn't crumble. If this exile was to be her life, she would find a way to survive, even if it meant embracing the very humanity her kind had always scorned. The pod's descent had been rough, leaving Zephyra disoriented and weak. The atmosphere of the barren moon was thin but breathable for her kind. She stumbled out, her wings folding protectively around her as she scanned the desolation. The silence was oppressive, but she steeled herself, determined to endure. Her exile might have stripped her of her dignity, but it would not take her will to survive. The faint hum of engines shattered the stillness. She turned sharply, her senses alert. A ship appeared on the horizon, its bulky, rusted frame a stark contrast to the sleek designs of her people's vessels. As it approached, her heart quickened. Humans. The ship landed with a clunky thud, and the ramp lowered. Zephyra backed away instinctively, her body tense. She had heard enough about humans to know they were unpredictable, their emotions wild and chaotic. A small group emerged, clad in mismatched gear. One of them, a woman with sharp features and keen eyes, stepped forward. Zephyra straightened, masking her fear with a stoic expression. "I do not require assistance," she said coldly, her voice echoing with the melodic cadence of her people. The woman raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "You don't look like you're in a position to refuse it," she replied, her tone brisk but not unkind. Zephyra's gaze flicked to the others. Their body language was strange, relaxed, open, unguarded. It was unnerving. Among her kind, every movement was calculated, every word measured. These humans were chaotic, just as she'd been told. Yet there was no hostility in their eyes. The woman extended a hand. "I'm Elena. You look like you could use a meal and a place to rest." Zephyra hesitated, her pride warring with her desperation. Finally, she relented, stepping cautiously onto the ship. Inside, the air was warm and smelled faintly of metal and something sweet. The humans moved about with an ease that baffled her. They spoke freely, their voices overlapping, their laughter unrestrained. Elena handed her a small package of food. Zephyra unwrapped it cautiously, her stomach growling despite herself. The taste was strange, but satisfying. She ate in silence, observing the crew. "Where are you from?" Elena asked, sitting across from her. Zephyra hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "A place far from here." "It no longer matters." Elena studied her for a moment. "Well, you're here now. That's what matters to us." The simplicity of the statement caught Zephyra off guard. In her world, worth was tied to status, to what one could contribute to the collective. These humans seemed to value existence itself. "You're different," Zephyra said finally. Elena chuckled. "That's one way to put it." As the ship hummed with life around her, Zephyra felt a strange sensation she couldn't quite name. It wasn't belonging, not yet, but it was something close. For the first time in her life, she wondered if perhaps her exile wasn't the end, but a beginning. The hum of the ship was steady as Zephyra sat quietly in the corner, observing the crew. Their movements were purposeful but uncoordinated, lacking the rigid efficiency of her own people. Yet, they worked together in a way she couldn't fully comprehend, messy, yet effective. She was beginning to notice patterns in their chaos, threads of trust and camaraderie that bound them tighter than any law or decree. Her thoughts were interrupted by the blaring of an alarm. The crew immediately sprang into action, their casual demeanor replaced by sharp focus. Elena appeared at her side, her expression grim. "Pirates," she said simply. "We're outgunned, but we'll manage." "Pirates." Zephyra's stomach tightened. She had heard of these raiders, merciless scavengers who preyed on the weak. Her first instinct was to retreat, to find a secure corner where she could wait out the danger. That was how her people survived. Avoid unnecessary risks, preserve the self. But the humans didn't flee. They moved quickly, preparing defenses and arming themselves with a variety of weapons that looked crude compared to the technology she was used to. Their confidence was baffling. "You're staying here," Elena said firmly, placing a hand on Zephyra's shoulder. The ship shuddered as the first volley of fire hit. Zephyra's wings flared instinctively, her senses sharpening. The humans were already returning fire, their coordination improving as the seconds ticked by. "They'll overwhelm you," Zephyra said, her voice tight. "Not if we're smart," Elena replied, dashing toward the cockpit. Zephyra hesitated, torn between the urge to stay hidden and a strange pull to do something more. She watched as the crew worked together, shouting commands and covering one another without hesitation. They weren't just fighting to survive, they were fighting for each other. Her people would never do this. Survival was individual, calculated. Sacrifice was unthinkable. And yet, here were these humans, risking their lives without question. The ship jolted violently, throwing Zephyra against the wall. A sharp cry drew her attention. A young crew member was pinned beneath a collapsed support beam. The others were too occupied to notice. Without thinking, Zephyra rushed forward. Her smaller frame allowed her to maneuver into the narrow space. Her strength was limited, but she used her wings for leverage, straining to lift the beam just enough for the crew member to crawl free. "Thanks," the young man gasped, his face pale but grateful. Before she could respond, the ship shuddered again. The pirates were closing in. Zephyra's mind raced. Her people had always valued intellect above all else. If brute strength wouldn't win the day, perhaps strategy would. She scanned the controls, recognizing a system similar to her own technology. Her fingers flew across the interface, rerouting power to the ship's engines and shields. A risky maneuver, but one that could buy them time. Elena's voice crackled over the intercom. "What did you just do?" "Improvised," Zephyra replied. The ship surged forward, catching the pirates off guard. The humans capitalized on the opportunity, delivering a decisive blow that sent the attackers retreating. As the tension eased, the crew erupted in cheers. Zephyra stepped back, her chest heaving. She hadn't planned to get involved, but something about their determination had drawn her in. For the first time, she felt a flicker of something foreign but undeniable: pride. Elena approached, her expression a mix of exhaustion and admiration. You didn't have to help, but you did. Why? Zephyra hesitated, then said quietly, because you would have done the same. Elena smiled. Welcome to the crew. For the first time, Zephyra allowed herself to believe it might be true. The air was thick with the aftermath of battle. The crew worked diligently to repair the damage, their chatter subdued but tinged with relief. Zephyra sat in a quiet corner, her hands trembling slightly as she replayed the events in her mind. She had acted instinctively, something her kind was trained to suppress. Yet, for the first time, she didn't feel regret, only a strange, unsettling sense of belonging. Elena approached, holding a steaming cup of something she called coffee. She handed it to Zephyra without a word and sat down beside her. They shared a silence that felt less awkward than it should have. You did good back there, Elena said finally, breaking the quiet. Zephyra stared into the dark liquid, its unfamiliar scent sharp yet comforting. Your people are, unlike mine. We do not fight together. We do not risk ourselves for others. Elena tilted her head, studying her. Maybe that's why they left you behind. The words stung, but Zephyra couldn't deny the truth in them. Her exile had been a rejection of her inability to fit their mold of perfection. Yet, in this imperfect human crew, she had found something her own people had never offered: acceptance. I was taught that worth is measured by what we can produce, by what we contribute to the continuation of our kind, Zephyra said, her voice barely above a whisper. But here it seems different. Elena smirked. Here, worth is measured by who you are, not what you can do. Took me a while to figure that out, too. The simplicity of the statement left Zephyra momentarily speechless. For so long, she had believed her exile defined her, that her inability to bear children made her less than nothing. But these humans didn't seem to care about any of that. They saw her actions, not her failures. The young crew member she had saved earlier walked past, offering her a grateful nod. Zephyra's chest tightened, a strange warmth spreading through her. She had never been thanked before. Acknowledgement wasn't a concept her people entertained. Elena stood and offered her a hand. Come on, we've got a lot to fix. Zephyra hesitated, then took it, letting herself be pulled to her feet. Together, they joined the rest of the crew, who welcomed her into their circle as if she had always been one of them. As the hours passed, she found herself laughing at their jokes, marveling at their ingenuity, and even lending her own skills to their efforts. Her knowledge of advanced technology, once dismissed as useless by her own kind, proved invaluable here. Later, as the ship sailed quietly through space, Zephyra found herself standing at a viewport, gazing at the stars. For the first time, she didn't feel small or insignificant. She felt alive. Elena joined her, leaning against the frame. You thinking about staying? Zephyra didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked at the reflection of the crew behind them, imperfect, chaotic, and undeniably human. I think, she said slowly, I've already found where I belong. Elena grinned. Good. We're better with you here. Zephyra smiled faintly, the unfamiliar expression feeling more natural than she expected. Her exile had been the end of one life, but it had also been the beginning of another. One where she could finally be more than the sum of her failures. For the first time, she felt free.